good morning. Good morning to all of you. Can I request everyone to settle down and also request the speakers to come up to the dais. Lord Nick Stern, Naoko Ishii, Mr. Ibrahim Chow and Mr. C.K. Mishra should be joining us soon. Mr. Anand Patwardhan, Ms. Sheila Patel, she was here. Sheila, there she is. And Dr. Inga Anderson should also be joining us soon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thanks to all of you for having joined us at this morning session today. This session is primarily to launch a global adaptation report, a report prepared by the Global Commission on Adaptation, which is co-chaired by Mr. Bill Gates, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, and Ms. Kristalina Georgieva. This report is primarily presenting a pathway to adaptation across the world. We'll hear more about it from the authors of this report. We have a galaxy of very eminent speakers at this. We have Ms. Naoki Ishii, who's the CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility, also one of the commissioners for this commission. Mr. Ibrahim Chow, who's the Executive Secretary of the UNCCD. Given how large this event is, we can quite imagine what his time must be getting taken up for, and he will be joining us very soon. Mr. C.K. Mishra is the Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change of the Government of India. He's also a member of the Commission, should also be joining us soon. We have Mr. Anand Patwardhan, who's the Research Director of the Global Commission on Adaptation, one of the key authors of this report. We have Ms. Sheila Patel, who is the chair of the Slum and Shack Dwellers International and a commissioner of this commission. We have Lord Nicholas Stern, who really doesn't need too much of an introduction, but he's the chair of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. He's also a professor of economics and government at the London School of Economics. Finally, we have Ms. Inga Anderson, who is the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program. So with this as the galaxy of speakers, doesn't make sense for me to stay here for too long and talk too long. So let me straight away request Ms. Naoko Ishii to kindly give us an overview of the Commission and tell us a little more about the Global Environment Facility. Ms. Naoko Ishii.
Thank you, Opie, and very, very good morning to everyone. And welcome to this launch event of the report of the GCA, Global Commission on Adaptation, here in India, the margin of CCD, COP of Convention of Combating Desertification. As Opie already mentioned, the Global Commission on Adaptation is led by Ban Ki-moon, Bill Gates, and Kristalina Georgieva of the World Bank, and composed of more than 30 commissioners, and some of them are actually today with us in this room, and 20 convening countries. The commission was set up to raise the political ambition of adaptation and inspire actions on the ground. And it aims to catalyze actions in key economic systems to help vulnerable countries and communities to become much more resilient and tackle extreme poverty and achieve sustainable development goals. And it is managed by the World Resource Institute and the Global Center on Adaptation. So we were here today to launch the Commission's report, but this launch event in India is one of the few locations taking place today across the world that include in Marshall Islands, Fiji, Beijing, Geneva, Ottawa, and Washington, D.C., and more. In my view, it is particularly significant that we are launching this report here at the margin of UNCCD COP in India. Why CCD COP? Because there are very close linkage between land degradation and climate change. And I want to thank Ibrahim Chow, the Executive Secretary of the CCD, for joining us today shortly. The COP has gathered many environmental ministers and other thought leaders, so they are the prime audience of that report. So that's the reason that why we want to have this event at the margin of the CCD. Here, Ibrahim just joined us. So I just thank you to give us this space to launch this report on the occasion of COP. And why India? India has showing the strong leadership on the climate change issue, and it is one of the convening countries for the Commission. And we have today here 2 commissioners from India with us, Secretary Mishra and Sheila Patel. Thank you for being with us. And I also want to acknowledge Inga for your presence here. Thank you, Inga. And lastly but not least, we have a special guest, Lord Nick Stam, as a keynote speaker. And why it is also significant, so special, as you may know, Nick issued a very famous epoch-making report in 2006, so-called Stern Review, and he very elaborately explained the cost of inaction of the climate change. But today, I expect him to tell us more about the economic case of adaptation. So we really look forward to hearing from you, Nick. So ministers, ladies and gentlemen, the core, the meat of this report is actually the actions track. So this year is considered to be the action year, the year of action, that must lead to more actions on the ground. And me as a CEO of the GF, and I have been engaging with this process as a commissioner and the building of the GF's experience in adaptation for the past 2 decades. We at the GF are deeply committed to building on the actions on the ground, that particularly we were interested in the action track on agriculture and food security, climate resilient cities, and nature-based solutions, just name a few. You will shortly hear from Anand about key messages of the report. But before I conclude my short remarks, let me just reflect my very personal, let me share with you a personal reflection. The huge challenge inherent to adaptation is a vast amount of uncertainty of the future climate scenarios. Will we manage to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees? Or, unfortunately, will we end up in a much warmer world? Our response on the ground will be totally different based on the which scenario we will be going to, but we must take action now without really knowing the final climate scenario. We simply don't have the luxury to wait and see. One way to handle this vast uncertainty is for national and local governments and academics, including researchers who know the local knowledge, and the business and the communities to really collaborate more on planning and investment decisions. Well, we can't really solve the issue of uncertainty, but by creating that kind of space that then we can at least to brainstorm, to share ideas, and prepare ourselves for different scenarios. Only by working together will we find solutions which will leverage the private sector investment at the pace and the scale needed to address the climate crisis. I now look forward to hearing more from other speakers and also want to engage with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Naoko, not just for having been a commissioner in this commission, but also having led and really ensured that this commission is set up, really led the work of this commission. Thank you so much for this. May I now invite Mr. Ibrahim Chow, who's the Executive Secretary of the UNCCD. And as I said, that given that this event is really their event and how much going on here, is really a delight to have you here with us, even if it's for a short while. But thank you so much for coming. And I now request you to come and say a few words on what is the connection between the UNCCD and this report.
Good morning to all. First of all, allow me to congratulate the Commission for this invaluable report. It's really nice to actually put adaptation on top of the table. Usually it is actually in the corridors. And so glad that to see you all here. Land degradation and drought manifest themselves in many ways. Land abandonment, declining populations of wild species, loss of soil and soil health, and reduction of rangelands and fresh water, as well as deforestation. The combination of climate change and drought, land degradation, and desertification are not our imaginary future. The consequences are being felt now. You have all the numbers. 3.2 billion people affected by the phenomenon. When the IPPS said 1 million species are at risk of being severely affected or being extinct, the way I interpret it is that these species will be affected because of degradation of their habitats. When the habitat is affected, of course, species will feel it very hard. We know also that land degradation is affecting the most vulnerable communities that forced them to actually migrate in many ways. But listen to this. By 2050, land degradation and climate change will reduce crop yields by an average of 10% globally, 50% in some regions. Think about it. By 2050, we will need 50% more crops to feed the 10 billion people. And here, land degradation and climate change are reducing our food production. So where this situation is leading us, potentially, is very dangerous. Of course, most of the focus has been so far on mitigation, rightly so. We need to address the issue of mitigation, but this should not be done at the expense of adaptation. What is clear is that reversing land degradation and increasing soil organic carbon provides one of the surest, low-cost, and multiple-win solutions. We know, and you have seen the IPCC report and all the scientific reports, land restoration is one of the cheapest solutions to climate. But more than that, as opposed to the technological solutions of capturing carbon, when you invest on land, you not only put the carbon back to the land and to the soil where it belongs, but you actually generate much more benefits to society, to communities, and to your economy. So it is certainly one of the best solutions we have right now. I mean ecosystem restoration, in particular on land, of course also in coastal areas and in oceans. As someone coming from dry land, a dry land country, I can assure you that access to productive land and access to water is life. It is something that I still live because my community is still affected by the phenomenon. And I have seen something that has affected my life and the life of our communities that I will never forget. So it is not something that you read in books, in my case. It is not something that you see as statistics. This is something that you live and know is part of your DNA. So we are not talking here about just numbers. We are talking about people. Restoring degraded land and soil would in particular also help restoration of the economy. You also know the numbers. I'm sure you will hear more from Lord Nick Stern about the numbers. What is the solution that we have right now? We have climate change, we have land degradation, we have communities that are being affected by food production, we have the poorest communities on earth whose lives are being affected by insecurity due to land degradation, conflicts over access to land and water. So you have all the negatives. How can you transform that into an opportunity? And by restoring land, you actually change the narrative. You provide them with solutions rather than just listing, having a litany of problems. You actually have a nice list of solutions there. Job creation, economy, prosperity, peace, reducing unwanted migration, reducing conflicts over access to land and water, etc., etc. So I just wanted to thank you again, Naoko, for the invitation. Congratulate the Commission for the work that you are doing. Thank you for putting the issue of adaptation back on the table, and that those people who are affected by land degradation, by climate change, they deserve more than the crumbs. They deserve attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary Chow. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your nice words, very encouraging and strong messages that you have conveyed. May I now turn to my colleague, Mr. Anand Patwardhan. We're all eager to hear what the report says. The request to Anand to present to us what the report's suggestions are.
Good morning. Thank you very much, OP. It's a real pleasure. It's a privilege to be here with you all to present sort of the key findings and messages of the report. You've already got a little bit of a preview of that from Naoko's opening remarks. Again, on behalf of the managing partners to the Commission, the World Resources Institute, and the Global Center on Adaptation, a very sincere thanks to Naoko for her leadership as a commissioner, but also in helping orchestrate this launch in India, and of course to the UNCCD, to Ibrahim, and to the host country for making this possible. May I have the presentation, please? The Commission report that we are presenting today, I want to acknowledge, is a labor of love from a very large cast. Includes our commissioners, their teams, the GEF, the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, very actively involved in co-creating and shaping the report, to a very large number of research partners who have worked very closely to give the base of expertise through background papers. So what you see here in the report is really, in a sense, the tip of the iceberg of the work that the Commission has attempted to do over the course of the last year in putting this together. And of course, our advisors and other collaborators who have shaped this process. As Naoko mentioned, the Commission is co-led by Kristalina Georgieva, former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and Bill Gates. a very distinguished and diverse set of commissioners from across the globe. Very grateful that we have Sheila Patel and Inger Anderson as two of our commissioners who are here as well, of course, along with Naoko. And a number of convening countries who have really provided the underlying backbone to support the work of the Commission. So what you see here, in a sense, reflects a large and collaborative effort over the last year. What we are doing today is launching the synthesis. As Naoko mentioned, we are trying to follow the sun with events starting off in the Marshall Islands and Fiji, in Beijing, in Delhi, and then moving on through Europe and the US. The report that we are launching today is a key milestone in the Commission process. And just to remind you, we are here after a year of active work, collaboration, and engagement. But this report is not meant to be left as is, really meant to stimulate a year of action, which is what will happen starting with the Climate Summit coming up in New York later this month. And hopefully serve as a catalyst for continued action. So really see this report as a action initiating and catalyzing event. So coming to the synthesis report, which is being launched today, I just want to remind everyone that what we are launching here is a short synthesis document. We will have a longer technical report that we will be coming out with at COP25 in Santiago, Chile, later this year. And what the synthesis tries to do is really tries to do three things. Make the case. I think this audience doesn't need to be convinced about the need for adaptation, but we have often found that there is a need to make the case for action, perhaps in new and interesting ways. But then very quickly move into defining what we see as a better way. What do we do and how do we do it? How do we take action to scale? How do we accelerate action? And how do we overcome barriers that are preventing us from doing more, even though we realize the risks? So really, the bulk of the report really is on trying to develop arguments for what might be a better way. And then, of course, that leads to a call for action. How do we actually jumpstart this and make this happen in key sectors and systems that are at risk? So that's sort of the overall structure of the report, is around these three ideas of making the case, outlining a better way, and then jump-starting action. Again, we don't need to mention to this audience, this group, about the risks of climate change. Climate change is here and now, whether it's warmer temperatures, rising sea levels, stronger storms, or changes in rainfall patterns. In India, for example, we are seeing an intensification of rainfall that leads to, even if we have the same average rainfall, it happens in shorter and more intense bursts. So these changes are well known. They are being manifested in the here and now. And one of the most important, I think, developments in science over the last decade has been the improvement in attribution. So we can now actually say with a fair degree of confidence that the fingerprint of climate change can be seen in many of the events that we are experiencing. And all of these risks and impacts of climate change add up to a very significant economic and really human toll, which is why responding to climate change is a human, environmental, and economic imperative, whether it's in terms of what it will do to poverty, economic growth, the loss of yields, as Ibrahim mentioned, or the loss of land through sea level rise and coastal flooding. So given that we have the magnitude and scale of impacts that we expect, one might think that taking early action and adaptation is a good thing. And in fact, that has been one of the key ideas that we have tried to bring out through the report, is really the economic case for adaptation. So switching a little bit from the costs of inaction as the driver for ambitious mitigation, right? If we don't act, we are facing the risks, but really trying to highlight the benefits of action. What are the benefits of acting early and acting at scale? And so work that has been done as part of the Commission